My husband's diamond ring was the only treasure he left me. My son smirked. We needed the cash for our big day. When the jeweler called, he said, "Ma'am, you need to hear what we found inside the ring box." What had been hidden for decades shattered my world and opened a new chapter one never thought possible. The afternoon sun, diluted by the fine dust motes dancing in the air, cast long, weary shadows across my living room. It was the kind of quiet that, after 70 years, felt less like peace and more like an echoing emptiness. 2 years. 2 years since Richard had left me, taking with him not just his booming laugh and the familiar scent of his aftershave, but the very vibrancy of the world. My house, once bustling with life, now felt like a beautifully preserved museum, each object a silent testament to a love that had once filled every corner. He hadn't left much in the way of material wealth. Our life had been comfortable, never extravagant, built on hard work and shared dreams. But there was one thing: his diamond ring. It sat now on my finger, a weight both comforting and unbearable. Not his wedding band, no, that was buried with him, a symbol of our unbroken bond. This was a different ring, a gift for our 20th anniversary, a substantial diamond set in simple gold. For me, it wasn't merely a piece of jewelry. It was the last tangible piece of him, a promise of eternity, a fragile anchor in a world that, after Richard, had lost its colors. I'd often catch myself tracing its cool surface, remembering the crinkle around his eyes when he'd presented it, his gruff, "For my queen, who puts up with me." Oh, Richard. If only he knew the depths of the solitude that had settled in since he'd gone. The ring was a constant, a whisper of a love that had endured, a small, glittering defiance against the encroaching silence. Then Michael called. My son, successful, handsome, sharp as a tack, and, at times, as emotionally obtuse as a concrete wall. He announced his engagement to Emily, a woman whose lineage and expectations seemed to stretch back to the founding fathers, and whose taste ran to the decidedly opulent. I loved Michael, of course, but sometimes I felt as though he saw me more as an abstract concept of mother than as a living, breathing woman with her own needs and feelings. "Mom," he'd said, his voice bright, almost too bright, with a hint of that familiar, pushing urgency. "Emily and I have decided on a date. It's going to be huge. And, well, we were hoping you might contribute." My heart sank. I knew where this was going. He'd mentioned my ring before, casually, hinting at its value, its liquidity. I'd always brushed it off, feigning ignorance or simply changing the subject. But now, with the big day looming, he was relentless. He came over that evening, Emily in tow. She was all polished smiles and perfectly coiffed hair, her eyes scanning my home with a subtle, appraising glint. Michael, on the other hand, went straight for the jugular after a perfunctory hug. "Mom, look, we both know Dad didn't leave much beyond the house. And this wedding, it's going to cost a fortune. Emily's family is pitching in, but we need to match their effort. And frankly, that ring on your finger, it's just sitting there." He gestured, as if the diamond itself were a frivolous ornament rather than a piece of my soul. I clutched my hand instinctively. "Michael, it was your father's. It means a great deal to me." My voice was thin, a reedy protest against his rising tide of pragmatism. He sighed, a practiced, long-suffering sound. "Mom, it's not practical. You rarely go out, you don't need a huge diamond. Think of it as investing in our future, in the future of the family. Isn't that what Dad would have wanted? To see his son happy, building a legacy?" He was good, too good. He knew how to twist every word, every sentiment, against me. He painted a picture of me, lonely and clinging to a trinket, when I should be embracing the joyous future of my only son. Emily, bless her impeccable manners, just offered a sympathetic, yet unwavering, smile. The argument, if you could call it that, stretched on for what felt like hours. He pressed, he cajoled, he guilfed. He spoke of family obligations, of the practicalities of life, of my duty as a mother. My spirit, already worn thin by grief, simply couldn't withstand the assault. Each word felt like a tiny cut until I was bleeding out emotional energy. "All right, Michael," I finally whispered, the words tasting like ash. "All right, I'll sell it." A triumphant gleam flashed in his eyes, quickly masked by a show of grateful affection. He squeezed my hand, a gesture that felt less like comfort and more like a victor claiming his spoils. "Thank you, Mom. You're the best. This means everything to us." He left shortly after, Emily's bright laugh echoing in the hallway. The house settled back into its suffocating silence, but this time, it felt different. It wasn't just the quiet, it was the sharp, bitter sting of betrayal. I had sold a piece of Richard, a piece of myself for their big day. And as I looked down at my now bare ring finger, a profound emptiness settled in, deeper and colder than any I had known before. A seed of resentment, tiny but tenacious, began to sprout in the barren landscape of my grief. The next morning, the diamond ring felt like a lead weight on my palm. It wasn't just its monetary value, but the sheer emotional burden of parting with it. Each glint of the perfectly cut facets felt like a tiny, accusing eye. Richard had been so proud of finding it, describing how he'd haggled, how he'd saved. "Only the best for my Ellie," he'd boomed, his arms around me, pressing the velvet box into my hands. I could almost smell his cologne, the faint scent of Old Spice and honest labor. The memory was a sharp, exquisite pain. I drove to Henderson's Fine Jewelers, a place Richard and I had frequented for years. It was an old-fashioned establishment, smelling of polished wood, leather, and the faint, metallic tang of precious metals. Mr. Henderson, a man whose face was a map of gentle wrinkles and whose hands were surprisingly steady, always greeted us with genuine warmth. He knew our story, our small traditions, our anniversaries. He had seen us through half a century of life, from youthful exuberance to the quiet dignity of old age. Walking through the heavy oak door felt like crossing a threshold into another life. The small bell above chimed a mournful sound, or perhaps it was just my heart. Mr. Henderson, polishing a delicate silver locket behind the counter, looked up and his kind eyes softened as he saw me. "Eleanor, what a pleasant surprise. Though, not too often we see you alone these days." His voice was soft, laced with a gentle sympathy. He knew. Everyone knew. I offered a weak smile, pulling the ring from my purse. It felt almost sacrilegious to lay it on the cool velvet pad he offered. "Hello, George. I need to sell this." My voice cracked on the last word, and I swallowed hard, feeling the familiar prickle behind my eyes. He picked up the ring, his gaze lingering on the diamond, then on my face. He didn't ask why, didn't pry. He simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken grief and the pressures of life. "A beautiful piece, Eleanor. A truly magnificent stone." Richard had impeccable taste. He paused, turning the ring in his experienced fingers. "I'll give it a thorough assessment. It may take a few days." I could only nod, a lump forming in my throat. Each word of praise for the ring was a eulogy for a love, for a life. I felt physically ill, a hollow ache where the ring had been. I wanted to snatch it back, to shout that it wasn't for sale, that it was priceless, beyond any sum of money. But Michael's insistent face, Emily's expectant smile, flashed in my mind. I had promised. I had to. "Thank you, George," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. "Just let me know." The drive home was a blur of unshed tears. The familiar streets, the neatly manicured lawns, the comforting rhythm of suburban life, it all felt alien. My house, when I finally entered, was colder, emptier than ever. I wandered through the rooms, touching Richard's old armchair, running my hand over his favorite book on the nightstand. Each object was a ghost. I tried to find solace in the old photo albums, flipping through faded images of younger, happier selves. Richard, always with that mischievous sparkle in his eyes. Myself, vibrant and laughing. Michael, a chubby toddler, then a gangly teenager, then a confident young man. Life had been full, rich, predictable. Or so I had thought. Days bled into one another, each one a dull ache. I jumped at every phone call, expecting Mr. Henderson, dreading Mr. Henderson. The waiting was agony, a prolonged farewell. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, as I sat staring blankly at the television, a commercial for some cheerful new appliance droning in the background. The phone rang. The sound was so sudden, so jarring, it made me jump. I picked it up, my hand trembling slightly. "Hello, Eleanor?" "It's George Henderson." His voice was different. Not the usual calm, reassuring tone. It was serious, almost grave. A wave of unease washed over me. Had something happened to the ring? Had it been damaged? "Yes, George. Is everything all right?" I clutched the receiver tighter, my knuckles white. There was a brief pause, a moment pregnant with unspoken weight. "Eleanor, I need you to come down to the shop. Immediately, if you can." "Ma'am," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, almost conspiratorial, "you need to hear what we found inside the ring box." My world, already fragile, suddenly stopped. The cheerful drone of the television faded into nothingness. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, terrifying silence. What could possibly be inside a ring box that warranted such urgency, such secrecy? Fear, sharp and cold, mixed with a burgeoning, undeniable curiosity. My quiet life, it seemed, was about to be irrevocably shattered. The words hung in the air, a chilling echo in the sudden stillness of my home. Inside the ring box. My mind raced, trying to conjure a logical explanation. Had Richard hidden a secret message? A smaller, more intimate piece of jewelry? My imagination, usually a placid pool, churned with anxious possibilities. The fear that had gripped me was now laced with an almost desperate curiosity. What could possibly be so significant? "I'll be right there, George," I managed to say, my voice tight, barely audible even to myself. I hung up the phone, my hand still shaking. I grabbed my purse and keys, moving with an urgency I hadn't felt in years. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs, each beat a question mark. The quiet routine of my widowhood, the predictable rhythm of my days, felt like a distant memory, replaced by a sudden, exhilarating, yet terrifying, sense of purpose. The drive to Henderson's felt interminable. Every stoplight seemed to linger, every car in front of me to crawl. The familiar storefront, with its discreet gold lettering, seemed to loom larger, more mysterious than ever. The bell above the door chimed as I entered, a sound that now seemed to carry a note of impending revelation rather than simple greeting. Mr. Henderson was waiting behind the counter, his expression a mixture of concern and quiet anticipation. He gestured towards a small, velvet-lined display area. "Eleanor, thank you for coming so quickly." His voice was low, almost conspiratorial, confirming my suspicion that this was no ordinary discovery. My gaze immediately fell upon the familiar dark blue velvet box, the very one Richard had used to present the diamond ring. It sat on a pristine white cloth, looking utterly innocuous, yet now imbued with an undeniable aura of secrecy. "What is it, George?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My throat felt dry, constricted. He picked up the box, handling it with the reverence of an archaeologist unearthing a delicate artifact. When we were preparing the ring for valuation, a young apprentice, diligent as he is, noticed something unusual about the box itself. He thought it might be a fault, a loose panel. He turned the box in his hands, then, with a practiced, almost imperceptible movement, his thumb pressed against a tiny, almost invisible seam along the bottom edge. There was a faint click, and a small section of the velvet base slid open, revealing a shallow, perfectly concealed compartment beneath the main ring setting. It was a secret, hidden world, almost flush with the bottom, designed to escape all but the most meticulous inspection. My breath hitched. A secret compartment. My mind reeled. Richard, so straightforward, so transparent. How could he have kept such a thing from me? And for how long? Mr. Henderson carefully, almost reverently, tipped the box. From the tiny, dark recess, 2 items tumbled onto the white cloth. They weren't jewels, no glittering treasures. One was a small, oblong, indeed, podiarnished silver locket, no larger than my thumbnail, its surface dulled by time, completely lacking a chain. The other was a piece of paper, folded precisely into a neat rectangle, yellowed and fragile with age, clearly bearing the marks of countless years spent in darkness. My hand trembled as I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cool, smooth metal of the locket. It was utterly plain, unadorned, save for the faint etchings of what might have once been a delicate scrollwork. It felt oddly light, empty. Then, my gaze fell upon the paper. It was clearly a letter. A letter from Richard. A dizzying mix of emotions swirled within me: shock, a profound sense of bewilderment, and a burgeoning, almost painful excitement. This wasn't about money. This was about something far more profound, far more personal. This was about Richard, not the husband I knew, but a man who had kept a secret, hidden away in plain sight, for decades. The silence in the jewelry shop stretched, heavy with unspoken history. The little silver locket and the folded, yellowed letter lay between us, silent witnesses to a past I was only just beginning to uncover. I gripped the small, tarnished locket and the fragile, yellowed paper. They felt impossibly heavy in my trembling hands, like fragments of an unearthed past. My mind, still reeling from the shock of the hidden compartment, was a maelstrom of questions. Richard. My Richard. What secrets could he possibly have kept hidden for so long, so meticulously concealed within the very symbol of our enduring love? "Thank you, George," I managed to say, my voice hoarse. I couldn't read it here, in the clinical light of the jewelry shop, under George's sympathetic gaze. This was something intensely personal, something that demanded the solitude of my own home, the intimacy of the space Richard and I had shared for decades. He nodded, understanding. "Take your time, Eleanor. If you need anything, anything at all." I left the shop in a daze, the world outside seeming sharper, more vibrant, yet strangely distorted. The sun, once a source of gentle warmth, now felt like an unwelcome spotlight, exposing the raw wound that was beginning to open within me. The drive home passed in a blur. My usual caution at intersections was replaced by a reckless disregard. All I could focus on was the burning need to be alone, to unravel this sudden, terrifying mystery. I went straight to the living room, the one we'd always called our room. The worn leather armchair, where Richard used to read his newspaper, sat empty. His pipe stand, with the faint, lingering scent of cherry tobacco, stood beside it. Every object, every shadow, every dust mote in the sunbeam, now seemed to whisper his name, to mock my ignorance. I sank onto the sofa, the same sofa where we'd shared countless quiet evenings, a lifetime of ordinary moments that now felt like a carefully constructed lie. With hands that still trembled, I unfolded the letter. It crackled softly, a sound like dry leaves, or perhaps the breaking of a carefully preserved illusion. The handwriting was unmistakably Richard's, firm and deliberate, yet somehow imbued with a raw vulnerability I'd never seen. He had written it years ago, long before his illness had even been a shadow on our horizon. I began to read, each word a hammer blow to the carefully constructed edifice of my life. "My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, then I am no longer with you, and a secret I have carried for too long has finally found its way into your hands. My sweet Ellie, please know that writing this causes me more pain than you can ever imagine, and the guilt has been a silent companion for over 50 years. My breath caught in my throat. 50 years? Our entire married life. It was early in our marriage, Eleanor. You remember the time I was away for 6 months, working on the construction project in that small town up north, before we settled here. You were so brave, holding down the fort. I remembered. He'd hated being away, called me every night, his voice gruff with longing. I'd missed him terribly. I was lonely, Ellie. Unbelievably lonely. And there was a young woman there, a waitress at the local diner where I ate every night. Her name was Sarah. She was kind, a little lost, much like I felt at the time. What happened between us was a moment of weakness, a lapse in judgment that has haunted me every single day since. It was fleeting, a mistake born of isolation, not of love. My love was, and always has been, yours. A hot, stinging sensation rose behind my eyes. A moment of weakness. A mistake. My perfect Richard, my steadfast, honorable husband. The man who had never looked at another woman, never given me a moment's doubt. All of it a lie. But that moment, that terrible, irreversible mistake, had consequences. Sarah became pregnant. When I found out, she was already planning to leave town, to have the baby away from the judgment of her small community. I gave her money, more than I could afford at the time, and I begged her to tell me if it was mine. She admitted it was. She said she would give the child up for adoption, to give it a better life than she could offer. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold the paper steady. A child. Richard had a child. A daughter. Somewhere. I tried to find her, Eleanor. After you and I were settled, after Michael was born, the guilt became unbearable. I hired a private investigator, discreetly, of course. I found out Sarah had indeed given birth to a daughter, whom she named Clara. She was adopted by a family in another state. The trail went cold after that, or perhaps I simply lacked the courage to push further, to unravel the life we had built. The thought of confessing to you, of destroying our happiness, was more than I could bear. So I hid it. I buried it deep, along with the shame and the endless regret. The words blurred through my tears. My perfect marriage, my perfect life. All shattered by a single, devastating truth. The fury that began to simmer within me was a cold, alien thing. Fury at Richard, for his betrayal, for his cowardice in not confessing, for letting me live a lie for 50 years. Fury at myself, for being so naive, so blind. The locket, Eleanor, was meant for her. For Clara. I bought it years ago, hoping one day to find her, to give her something from her biological father. A small, inadequate gesture, I know. But it's all I had. My greatest regret, beyond hurting you, is not knowing my daughter. I pray with all that is left of my soul, that you, my strong, loving Eleanor, will find her. Find Clara. Tell her her father loved her, even if he was too much of a coward to be a part of her life. Ensure she is cared for. This is my last, desperate plea, my final act of atonement. Forgive me, my love. Forgive me if you can. Richard. The letter slipped from my grasp, fluttering to the carpet like a dying bird. The small silver locket lay beside it, an empty promise. My vision was swimming, the room tilting on its axis. The man I had loved, the man I had mourned, the man I believed I knew intimately, was a stranger. A betrayer. A father to another child. Grief, raw and potent, surged through me, but it was different now. It was a violent, suffocating grief for the loss of an illusion, for the demolition of my past. Anger, a fierce, burning flame, flared in my chest. How could he? How could he have lived with this burden, letting it fester, letting me live in blissful ignorance? But beneath the rage, a strange, new sensation began to stir. A purpose. A clear, undeniable directive from the grave. Find Clara. The thought of this unknown daughter, a ghost from Richard's past, now living somewhere in the world, unknowingly connected to me, was a revelation. It was a new, unexpected current pulling me from the wreckage of my shattered world. The perfect, loving Richard was gone, replaced by a flawed, tragic figure. But his last, desperate wish had given me something I hadn't realized I was missing, a reason to look forward, a new mission to fulfill. The tears continued to fall, but they were no longer just tears of betrayal. They were tears of a new, complex, and deeply unsettling awakening. The crumpled letter lay on the carpet, a silent testament to a life appended. I stared at it, then at the empty locket, then at the familiar photographs on the mantel, Richard's smiling face, Michael's graduation picture. The faces in the frames seemed to mock my shattered perception of them. My head throbbed with the force of the revelation, a drumbeat of anger and a strange, nascent resolve. My first instinct, a purely visceral one, was to confront Michael, to shove the letter into his hands and scream at him about the hypocrisy of family values, when his father had kept such a monumental secret. But then, a colder, more calculating thought took hold. What would he do? He would be furious, yes, primarily for what he'd perceive as a threat to his inheritance, a complication to his neatly ordered life. He would undoubtedly focus on the financial implications, the potential for a half-sister to lay claim to what he considered rightfully his. No, Michael was not ready for this. And frankly, I wasn't ready to share this raw wound with him. Not yet. The phone rang, startling me. It was Michael. Just his luck to call in the immediate aftermath of this seismic shift. I took a deep, shaky breath, attempting to compose myself, to re-erect the facade of the mild-mannered widow he expected. "Mom? Did you hear back from Henderson's yet about the ring?" His voice was bright, impatient, completely oblivious to the cataclysm that had just occurred in my living room. I felt a surge of cold fury, a stark contrast to the burning betrayal I felt from Richard. Michael's utter lack of empathy, his singular focus on the money, suddenly seemed grotesque, magnified by the weight of Richard's confession. He wasn't asking about my well-being, my feelings about selling the last tangible piece of his father. He was asking about the transaction. "Not yet, Michael," I lied smoothly, the lie tasting like ash. "They said it would take a few days." "Right. Well, keep me posted. Emily's got her eye on a dress that's quite something. We're really counting on that." He chuckled, a self-satisfied sound that grated on my raw nerves. I ended the call quickly, my hand gripping the phone with surprising force. The conversation solidified my decision. Michael was not a confidant for this. This was my burden, and now my mission. The rest of the day was a blur of internal monologue. My brain felt like a tangled ball of yarn, each strand a memory, a feeling, a question. How could Richard have done this? How could he have lived with such a secret, looking into my eyes, sharing our bed, building our life, all while carrying the weight of another child? The image of him, so steadfast, so predictable, splintered into 1,000 pieces. He was a far more complex, tragic figure than I had ever allowed myself to imagine. He wasn't just the loving husband, he was a flawed man, burdened by a youthful mistake and the fear of shattering his world. But amidst the wreckage of my perception, a new current began to pull. Find Clara. Richard's last plea. It wasn't just about fulfilling a dying wish, it was about understanding him, understanding the man who had loved me and betrayed me with such profound intensity. It was also, strangely, about me. For too long, my life had been defined by Richard, then by his absence. Now, this was a new path, an unexpected adventure in the twilight of my years. I began my clandestine investigation that very evening. Richard had kept old journals, leather-bound notebooks filled with neat handwriting, mostly mundane entries about his work, garden plans, reflections on current events. I had kept them out of sentimental attachment, never really delving into their contents. Now, they seemed to hum with hidden meaning. I reread Richard's letter, meticulously searching for every tiny clue. Small town up north, he'd written. Construction project. Waitress at the local diner. Sarah. He mentioned the approximate years. I pulled out the dusty box of his old journals. The earliest ones, from the period he'd mentioned, became my focus. I sifted through them, my fingers tracing the faded ink, looking for anything that deviated from the mundane. His entries from those 6 months were indeed sparse, oddly impersonal. But then, a few casual mentions began to stand out. Ate at the Blue Plate special again. Sarah recommended the apple pie. Sarah at the diner, always smiling despite her troubles. Innocent enough on their own, but now tinged with a painful irony. More importantly, he sometimes noted the names of the towns where his construction projects took him. Arrived in Harmony Creek. Hotel room satisfactory. Harmony Creek. It was a tiny dot on the map, a forgotten place in northern New York State. The next morning, I was at my computer, something I rarely did beyond checking emails. With clumsy, hesitant movements, I began to search. Old newspapers. Town archives. Anything about Harmony Creek, New York, in the mid-1970s. I felt a thrill of illicit excitement, a pulse of adrenaline I hadn't experienced in decades. This wasn't just a search, it was a quest, a journey into the uncharted territory of my husband's secret life, and, perhaps, into a forgotten part of myself. The fragile, quiet Eleanor was beginning to shed her skin, revealing something tougher, more resolute beneath. My new, unexpected purpose was pulling me forward, one tentative search query at a time. Harmony Creek, New York. The name itself sounded idyllic, a gentle whisper of simpler times. It was a stark contrast to the churning storm within me as I navigated my old sedan along winding country roads. I had concocted a believable, if flimsy, excuse for Michael, a genealogical interest, I'd told him, researching Richard's distant relatives. He always talked about his great-aunt in northern New York. He'd grunted a non-committal response, too preoccupied with wedding plans to pay much attention. A small victory. The drive was long, the landscape slowly transforming from the manicured suburbs to rolling hills and dense forests, interrupted by sleepy towns that seemed untouched by time. Each mile I covered felt like another layer of my familiar life peeling away, revealing a raw, unknown world beneath. I thought of Richard, a younger, perhaps more vulnerable man, driving these same roads, carrying his secret, building a life that was both ours and a carefully guarded illusion. My feelings towards him were a messy tangle. Betrayal still simmered, but it was now laced with a strange, melancholic understanding. He was not the monolith of virtue I had believed him to be, but a man burdened by human weakness, by fear, by regret. Harmony Creek was exactly as I had pictured it, a cluster of brick buildings around a modest town square, a single traffic light, and a palpable sense of history lingering in the air. The local library was my first stop, a charming, somewhat dusty building with creaky wooden floors and the faint, comforting smell of old paper. I spent hours hunched over microfiche readers, my eyes straining to decipher faded newspaper articles from the 1970s. Local news, social events, classifieds, anything that might hold a clue. The initial search was frustrating. No mention of a Sarah at the Blue Plate special, the diner Richard had referenced in his journal. It was a common name, a common type of establishment. Doubt began to creep in, a cold finger of discouragement. Had I misread Richard? Was this a wild goose chase based on a mistaken identity? But I pushed on, fueled by a stubbornness I hadn't realized I possessed. I switched tactics, looking for notices of new residents, departures, anything that seemed out of place in the tightly knit community. And then a tiny, almost insignificant blurb in a weekly community newsletter from 1974 caught my eye. Local girl, Sarah Jenkins, leaves for brighter opportunities. It was vague, of course, but the name, the timing, the euphemism, it sent a shiver down my spine. Sarah Jenkins. The name resonated with a sudden, unsettling clarity. She wasn't just Sarah anymore. She was a real person, a woman who had intersected with Richard's life, a woman who had carried his child. My feelings towards her were a complex mix. A part of me, the betrayed wife, felt a prickle of resentment, of judgment. But another part, the woman who had lived a quiet life, now understood the desperation that could drive a person to such choices, the quiet courage required to leave a small town with a secret. I spent the next few days talking to the town's oldest residents, a delicate dance of casual conversation and pointed questions. I lingered in the local coffee shop, struck up conversations at the grocery store, visited the historical society. Most people remembered the construction boom of the mid-70s, the influx of temporary workers. Some vaguely recalled a pretty young waitress at the Blue Plate special. Their memories were hazy, intertwined with local gossip and half-forgotten anecdotes. Oh, Sarah Jenkins, one elderly woman, Mrs. Gable, mused, sipping her tea at the diner, which, remarkably, was still called the Blue Plate special, though updated. Yes, a sweet girl, but a bit flighty. Always dreaming of bigger things. Then she just up and left. No real goodbye. The town gossiped, you know. Whispers about, well, you know how these things are in a small town. She gave me a knowing look, her eyes bright with unsaid meaning. Whispers about what, Mrs. Gable? I asked, trying to keep my voice even, my heart hammering. She leaned in conspiratorially. About a baby. A secret shame, they called it. Poor girl. Never did see her again. Family packed up a few years later, moved out west, I think. Had another daughter, a quiet one, Martha, who'd finished school. They followed the work, like so many back then. A baby. A secret shame. It was all there, laid bare by the casual cruelty of small-town memory. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, grim and heartbreaking. Sarah Jenkins. Pregnant. Giving birth to a child, a daughter. Clara. It was all real. This wasn't just Richard's story anymore. It was Sarah's and now Clara's. And by extension, mine. The discovery was both a relief and a burden. The trail hadn't gone cold. There was a name, a family, a direction. But it also meant stepping further into the painful reality of Richard's betrayal, into a past that would forever alter my perception of our shared history. As I drove out of Harmony Creek, leaving its sleepy quiet behind, I carried with me not just a new set of clues, but a profound sense of the complexities of human lives, of the secrets people keep, and the long, rippling echoes of a single, impulsive act. The mystery of Clara was deepening, and with it, my understanding of the man I had loved. The name Sarah Jenkins, coupled with the whispers of a secret shame and a family moving out west, provided the first solid lead beyond Richard's cryptic letter. I returned home from Harmony Creek with a renewed sense of purpose, tinged with a heavy dose of apprehension. This was no longer a vague historical investigation. It was a search for a living, breathing person, my husband's daughter, a half-sister to my son. The implications were immense, overwhelming. I immediately turned to more advanced methods, discreetly, of course. Michael, absorbed in wedding logistics and the ever-escalating costs of Emily's dream day, barely noticed my increased computer usage or the occasional hushed phone calls. I hired a private investigator, a retired police officer named Frank Miller, recommended by a friend's nephew. He was a quiet, unassuming man with shrewd eyes and an uncanny ability to navigate the labyrinthine world of public records and digital footprints. I gave him what little I had, Sarah Jenkins, the approximate year of Clara's birth, the hints about the family moving west. The waiting was agonizing. Each day stretched into an eternity, filled with a frantic energy I hadn't known I possessed. I busied myself with household tasks, but my mind was always elsewhere, picturing Clara, imagining her life. Was she happy? Did she resemble Richard? Did she even know she was adopted? The questions swirled, a relentless current. A week later, Frank called. His voice was calm, professional, but there was an underlying note of success. Eleanor, I have a lead on Sarah Jenkins. She passed away 10 years ago in Arizona. But she had a sister, Martha, who is still alive and living in California. And yes, Sarah did have a daughter. My breath hitched. A daughter? Was she? Clara May Peterson, he confirmed. Adopted through a private agency. I have her adoptive name and a current address. The news hit me with the force of a physical blow. Clara May Peterson. The name resonated in my mind, a tangible link to Richard, to a past I was still struggling to comprehend. I thanked Frank profusely, my voice thick with emotion, and hung up. I held the slip of paper with Clara's details, staring at it as if it were a magical artifact. It was a fragment of a lost life, now found. The next step was meeting Martha Jenkins. I felt a strange mix of fear and necessity. She was Sarah's sister, Clara's aunt. She held a piece of this fragmented story, a perspective I desperately needed. I booked a flight to California under the guise of visiting an old college friend. Martha lived in a small, well-kept house in a quiet suburb, surrounded by a riot of colorful bougainvillea. She was a few years younger than I, with kind, tired eyes that held a hint of her sister's youthful beauty. I introduced myself simply as Eleanor Davis, an old acquaintance of Richard's who was doing some personal research into his past. I mentioned Harmony Creek and Sarah's name, carefully gauging her reaction. Martha's face, initially polite, grew wary, then shadowed with old pain. She invited me in, offering me tea, her hands nervously smoothing her apron. Sarah, that's a name I haven't heard in a long time, she said, her voice soft. She was my older sister. Died too young. I explained, carefully, haltingly, about Richard's letter, about the hidden compartment, about his final wish. I watched her face, searching for judgment, for anger, for understanding. She listened in silence, her gaze fixed on her teacup. When I finished, the quiet stretched between us, heavy with unspoken memories. Finally, Martha sighed, a deep, shuddering breath. I always knew Sarah had a secret. We never talked about it openly, not after we moved away. My parents, they were heartbroken, but they loved Sarah. They just wanted to protect her from the gossip. She swore me to secrecy, said she'd made a mistake, and wanted to put it behind her. She never spoke of the baby again, not to me, not to anyone. Her eyes met mine, filled with a weary sorrow. Clara, yes, Sarah had a daughter. She was beautiful, even as a baby. I helped Sarah for a few weeks after she was born, before the adoption. It broke Sarah's heart to give her up, but she truly believed it was for the best. She wanted Clara to have a good life, a life she couldn't give her. Martha paused, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. I'm glad Richard finally acknowledged her. He was a good-looking man. I remember him from the hotel. Sarah had a crush. She recounted what little she knew about the adoption, the private agency, the careful secrecy. She corroborated much of what Richard had written, offering details that brought the faded memories to vivid life. And then she confirmed it, pulling out a faded manila folder from a locked drawer. Inside were old letters, a few photographs of a young Sarah, and a copy of the adoption papers. There it was, in black and white, Clara May Peterson, born on a specific date, adopted by Mr. and Mrs. Peterson of another town in California. I clutched the papers, my heart pounding. It was all real. This wasn't just a distant ghost anymore. Clara was a woman, living her life, unknowingly connected to this tangled web of secrets and unspoken desires. I thanked Martha, feeling a profound sense of gratitude and a shared burden of history. As I left her quiet home, the California sun warm on my face, a new weight settled on my shoulders. I had found her. Clara, Richard's daughter. Now, the ultimate dilemma presented itself, raw and terrifying. How do I tell her? How do I introduce myself? What right do I have to shatter her world with a truth so painful, so long hidden? And how would this new revelation impact Michael and the delicate, already strained fabric of my own life? The glimmer of hope was also a terrifying precipice, and I stood on its edge, staring into the unknown. Armed with Clara's adoptive name and address, the weight of the secret now felt even heavier, a tangible burden in my hands. The slip of paper from Frank Miller's investigation felt like a key, unlocking a door to an entirely new life, one that was both exhilarating and profoundly terrifying. How do you approach a woman, a stranger, and tell her that the man she believed was her biological father was not, and that her true father was your deceased husband, a man she never knew? The ethics of it, the sheer audacity, overwhelmed me. I researched Clara May Peterson. The internet, a tireless chronicler of lives, quickly yielded results. She was a landscape artist, living in a quiet coastal town further north in California. Her website showcased vibrant, evocative paintings of the Pacific coastline and rolling hills, infused with a distinct, almost melancholic beauty. Her artist's bio was brief, mentioning a love for nature and a commitment to her craft. No mention of family, no personal details that gave any hint of her inner world. She lived a modest, solitary life, much like my own, a thought that brought a strange kinship. Studying her photographs, I searched for any trace of Richard. Her eyes, perhaps? The set of her jaw? It was a fruitless, heartbreaking exercise. She was her own person, beautiful in her own right, with a quiet strength in her gaze. Yet, an irrational part of me longed for a flicker of recognition, a sign that Richard's blood ran in her veins. I couldn't just knock on her door and blurt out the truth. That would be cruel, catastrophic. I needed a pretext, a way to observe her, to feel her out, to understand the woman she had become. Her website provided the perfect cover, an interest in her art. Under the guise of an art collector from out of state, I sent her an email, expressing my admiration for her work and my interest in purchasing a piece. I concocted a believable persona, a widow, newly interested in art as a way to redecorate my life. Clara responded promptly, her emails polite and professional, suggesting a visit to her small studio. The drive to her town was fraught with a nervous anticipation that tightened my chest. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my palms sweating. This was it. The moment I would meet Richard's daughter. My stomach churned with a mixture of guilt, fear, and a burgeoning, almost maternal, protectiveness. What if she hated me? What if she wanted nothing to do with this painful past? Her studio was a converted garage, bright and airy, filled with the scent of oil paint and turpentine. Canvases leaned against every wall, depicting the dramatic beauty of the California coast. When she opened the door, I saw her, Clara May Peterson. She was in her late 40s, with a lean, artistic build, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her eyes, a striking shade of hazel, held an intensity that was both captivating and slightly guarded. They were not Richard's eyes, I noted with a pang of something akin to disappointment, but they held a similar depth, a capacity for quiet observation. "Mrs. Davis? Please come in." Her voice was soft, melodic, with a hint of a gentle tremor. "Clara," I said, extending my hand, my voice surprisingly steady. Her hand was firm, her grip confident. As our fingers brushed, a strange jolt went through me, an electric recognition. Richard's daughter. The thought was a silent scream in my mind. We talked for nearly an hour. I genuinely admired her work, and my questions about her technique and inspiration were sincere. She spoke passionately about her art, her love for the rugged beauty of the landscape, the way the light played on the ocean. She was articulate, thoughtful, and possessed a quiet grace that immediately drew me in. I found myself listening, truly listening, not just as an investigator, but as a woman fascinated by another woman. As she spoke, I subtly searched for glimpses of Richard in her mannerisms, her expressions. Did she have his way of tilting his head when deep in thought? His slight frown when concentrating? It was a desperate, almost obsessive exercise. I noticed her hands, long and elegant, capable hands that created such beauty. I wondered if they were anything like Richard's strong, workman's hands. There was a profound loneliness in her studio, a self-imposed solitude that resonated with my own. She seemed content, yet there was an underlying current of something unspoken, a quiet yearning. Was it the yearning for roots, for knowledge of her origins? I left her studio that day having purchased a small, exquisite painting of a sunset over the ocean. It was a tangible piece of her, a connection. But more importantly, I left with a clearer sense of the woman she was, intelligent, sensitive, artistic, and clearly, deeply private. The strange, inexplicable connection I felt towards her was undeniable. It wasn't just the guilt or the obligation to Richard. It was a growing, tender protectiveness, a nascent form of maternal love for a daughter I never knew I had. But the question remained, a gnawing torment in my mind, how to tell her. How to break the news that would undoubtedly shatter her world. Every interaction, every polite smile, every shared word was a step on thin ice. I was carrying an immense burden of truth, and its revelation would either bring us together or irrevocably drive us apart. The weight of Richard's secret, once a source of anger, was now a shared responsibility, binding me to this woman, to Clara, in a way I could never have anticipated. I felt a growing urgency, a need to shed this burden, to let the truth, however painful, finally see the light. The painting of the sunset over the ocean now hung in my living room, a vibrant splash of color in a space that had long felt muted. Each time I looked at it, I saw Clara's hands, Clara's vision, Clara's quiet strength. And each time, the urgency to tell her the truth pressed down on me, a physical ache. The pretense of an art collector was wearing thin, becoming a heavy cloak of deceit. The burgeoning connection between us, fragile yet real, demanded honesty. I called her a few days later, my heart thrumming a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Clara," I began, my voice steadier than I felt, "I was wondering if you might consider having dinner with me. I'm still in the area, and I've found your company quite enjoyable." It was a bold move, a departure from my usual cautious nature, but the situation demanded it. She hesitated, then, to my profound relief, accepted. "I'd like that, Mrs. Davis. I don't often get to talk about art with someone so genuinely interested." I chose a quiet, unassuming restaurant, hoping the neutral setting would lend itself to a difficult conversation. But as we sat across from each other, amidst the gentle clatter of cutlery and soft murmur of other diners, I knew this wasn't the right place. The truth needed silence, intimacy, and the safety of a private space. "Clara," I said, interrupting a pleasant discussion about brushstrokes, "would you mind coming back to the place I'm staying after dinner? There's something important I need to share with you. Something deeply personal." Her hazel eyes, usually so expressive, narrowed slightly, a hint of concern clouding them. She studied my face for a long moment, perhaps sensing the tremor in my voice, the unspoken weight in my gaze. "Of course, Mrs. Davis," she said, her voice softer now. "Is everything all right?" "It will be," I promised, a silent prayer escaping my lips. Back at the quiet Airbnb I'd rented, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. I led her to the small living area, offering her a seat, my hands feeling clumsy, my movements deliberate. The painting of the sunset seemed to glow on the wall, a silent, beautiful witness. "Clara," I began, my voice a whisper, yet firm, "my name isn't just Eleanor Davis. It's Eleanor Miller. My husband, Richard Miller, passed away 2 years ago." I paused, allowing the words to settle, to lay the foundation for the edifice of truth I was about to build. She nodded slowly, politely. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Miller." "Thank you. But there's more to it than that, Clara. Much more." I took a deep breath, clutching the small, tarnished silver locket and Richard's fragile, yellowed letter, which I had carefully placed in my purse. "My husband, he left me a letter. A confession, hidden for decades inside his diamond ring box." I watched her face as I spoke, seeing the confusion, then a dawning apprehension, slowly replace the polite curiosity. Her composure, usually so serene, began to crack around the edges. "In this letter," I continued, my voice steadying, now fueled by a desperate need for transparency, "Richard confessed to a secret from early in our marriage. A secret that resulted in the birth of a daughter. A daughter he never knew." Clara's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. She shifted in her seat, her gaze fixed on the letter and the locket in my hand, as if they held some terrible, irresistible power. Her hands, usually so still, began to tremble faintly. "That daughter, Clara," I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet each word resonated with the weight of 50 years of hidden history, "is you." The silence that followed was deafening, suffocating. Clara stared at me, her face draining of color, her mouth slightly agape. Shock, pure and unadulterated, washed over her features, followed quickly by a wave of profound hurt. Her hazel eyes, once warm and kind, now blazed with a raw, agonizing confusion, then a searing anger. What are you saying?" Her voice was hoarse, barely audible. "My parents, my adoptive parents, they told me my biological parents died in an accident. They always said." Her voice trailed off, choked with disbelief. "Your biological mother, Sarah Jenkins, gave you up for adoption to give you a better life. She told Richard it was for the best." I placed the letter, now carefully opened, and the locket on the small coffee table between us. "This is Richard's confession. He wrote it years ago, consumed by guilt, hoping I would find you. And this," I pushed the small, silver locket towards her, "was meant for you. From him. A symbol of his belated love, his endless regret." Clara didn't touch them. Her gaze darted from the letter to the locket, then back to my face, searching, dissecting. "My whole life a lie?" Her voice was broken, a ragged whisper of disbelief and pain. "My parents, the ones who raised me, they lied. And he, my biological father, he just abandoned me." The questions came in a torrent, raw and accusatory. Why now? Why after all these years? Why didn't he ever come for me? Was I just a mistake he wanted to erase? Her anger, sharp and piercing, was directed not just at Richard, but at the entire cruel deception. And a sliver of it, I knew, was directed at me, the messenger of this devastating news. I didn't try to justify Richard's actions completely. He was a flawed man, Clara. A good man in many ways, but deeply afraid. afraid of hurting me, of destroying the life we had built. He carried that guilt, that secret, for 50 years. He tried to find you discreetly, but the trail went cold. I picked up the locket, offering it to her. He wanted you to know he thought of you, that he regretted not knowing you. This was his last, desperate act of atonement. She finally took the locket, her fingers trembling as they closed around the cold metal. She looked at it, then at me, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "And you?" she asked, her voice tight with suspicion. "Why are you doing this?" "To clear his conscience." At first, yes, I admitted, my own vulnerability exposed. I was angry. Furious. My world was shattered too. The man I loved for 50 years, the man I thought I knew completely, had kept this profound secret. But as I searched for you, as I learned about your mother, about Richard's regret, I realized something. This isn't just about his atonement or my shattered illusions. It's about you, Clara. It's about a connection that was denied, a family that was incomplete. Richard was my husband, but in a strange, painful twist of fate, he also made you my daughter. I met her gaze, no longer holding back the emotions that had surged within me since I'd first seen her. I don't expect you to forgive him, or to accept this immediately. Your anger, your pain, it's valid. But I hope you might consider letting me be a part of your life now. To share whatever part of him I can, to offer you the family you didn't know you had. I'm an old woman, Clara, and I'm lonelier than I care to admit. And I've found that, in finding you, I've found a new purpose, a new reason to live. I want to know you, Clara. If you'll let me. The tears finally spilled from her eyes, silent, slow, tracing paths through the dust of decades. She clutched the locket, her knuckles white. This was the moment. The culmination of a hidden life, the breaking of a long-held silence. I had laid bare the painful truth, exposed my own vulnerability, and offered her not just a past, but a potential future. The air crackled with the weight of her choice, a choice that would define not only her path, but mine as well. Clara sat there, a statue carved from disbelief and pain, the small silver locket clutched in her hand like a lifeline, or perhaps a weapon. Tears streamed silently down her face, but her eyes, though red-rimmed, held a fierce, almost defensive glint. The truth, delivered so gently, yet with such devastating force, had not just landed, it had detonated, sending shards of her carefully constructed identity flying. I need to go," she whispered, her voice raw, barely audible. She didn't look at me, her gaze fixed on some distant, unseen point beyond the window. The painting of the sunset, once a symbol of connection, now felt like a cruel mockery of warmth. "Of course, Clara," I said, my voice soft, understanding. I knew she needed space, time to process this monumental shift in her reality. I made no move to stop her, to offer platitudes. This was her grief, her anger, her shattering. "Take as long as you need. My number is on that card. The painting, it's yours. A small gift." She rose stiffly, her movements jerky, as if her limbs had forgotten how to coordinate. She didn't acknowledge the painting. She simply walked out, leaving behind a silence far more profound than any I had known. The closing of the door was a soft thud, but in my heart, it echoed like thunder. I had done it. I had fulfilled Richard's last wish, and in doing so, I had cracked open a world that might never heal. The following days were a torment of anxious waiting. I called Clara once, leaving a gentle voicemail, saying only that I understood and that I was there if she needed anything. No response. Each passing hour felt like a lead weight, pulling me deeper into a pit of uncertainty. Had I made a terrible mistake? Had I caused more harm than good? The image of her devastated face was etched into my mind. Then, inevitably, came Michael. The wedding was looming, now only a few weeks away, and his calls were a relentless drumbeat of demands and anxieties. He was no longer asking about the ring. He was demanding to know when the money would be transferred. I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. The truth, or at least a significant portion of it, had to be revealed. He arrived at my house in a flurry of self-importance, his expensive suit impeccable, his phone perpetually pressed to his ear. Emily, thankfully, was not with him. He strode into the living room, oblivious to the emotional debris scattered across the sofa, the silent, accusing presence of Clara's painting. Mom, seriously, what's taking so long with the jeweler? Emily's parents are starting to ask questions. This is getting ridiculous. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his impatience palpable. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. This was not going to be easy. Michael, I began, my voice calm, belying the tremor in my hands. There's something important I need to tell you. It concerns your father. And the ring box. His expression shifted, a flicker of annoyance, then a grudging curiosity. What about it? Did they find some ancient Egyptian gold inside? Don't tell me it's a fake, Mom, because if it is, I swear. It's not a fake, Michael. And it's not gold. I picked up a replica of the letter, a copy I had made for this very conversation, and the tarnished locket. Your father, he had a secret. A big one. As I recounted the story, carefully omitting some of the more intimate details of Richard's guilt, but laying bare the essential facts, the affair, the hidden compartment, the letter, the existence of a daughter named Clara. Michael's face went through a rapid series of transformations. Confusion, then disbelief, then a growing, furious red. A daughter, he exploded, his voice rising, shattering the fragile peace of the room. He snatched the letter from my hand, his eyes scanning the words, his face contorting in a mixture of horror and outrage. Are you telling me Dad had another kid? A half-sister? And he kept it a secret from you? From me? His anger, I realized with a chilling clarity, was not for me, not for Richard's betrayal of our marriage. It was purely self-centered. What does this mean? Does she have a claim on anything? Our inheritance? Our family name? This is insane, Mom. This is going to ruin everything. His important day seemed to be crumbling before his eyes. It means, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, a new, steely resolve forming in my heart, that you have a half-sister, Michael. A woman who is just as much Richard's child as you are. Your father, flawed as he was, left her this locket and a wish for her to be found, to be cared for. He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. Cared for? Are you serious? She's probably some opportunist, looking to cash in on a dead man's mistake. This is a disaster. What will Emily's family say? What will Emily say? This completely tarnishes our reputation. He paced the room like a caged tiger, his fury radiating from him in palpable waves. Your father, I said, standing up, meeting his angry gaze head-on, made a mistake. A profound, painful mistake. But he was also a man who loved us and who, in his last act, sought to make amends. This isn't about tarnishing reputations, Michael. It's about truth. It's about family and its messy, complicated reality. And it's about a woman, Clara, who has lived her entire life unknowingly severed from her biological roots. I watched him, truly watched him, and saw not just my son, but a man blinded by his own ambition and shallow concerns. The ring, the money, the big day, it was all a fragile facade. The revelation had stripped away the pleasantries, exposing the core of his character. You need to understand, Michael, I continued, my voice now resonant with authority, that family is not just about bloodline or inheritance. It's about connection, about forgiveness, about accepting people for who they are, flaws and all. Your father sought to bring Clara into our lives, however belatedly. And I intend to honor that. His mouth opened, ready to unleash another volley of protests, but something in my gaze, in the newfound strength of my posture, seemed to give him pause. He saw not just his mother, the grieving widow, but a woman transformed, a woman who had unearthed her own inner strength. He saw, for the first time, a glimmer of the formidable woman Richard had once called his queen. The confrontation was painful, yes, but it was also a revelation. In facing Michael's raw selfishness, I found my own unwavering resolve. I had a daughter to welcome, a new chapter to write, and I would not allow his limited vision to define my path forward. The confrontation with Michael left me drained, but strangely invigorated. His anger, though painful to witness, had solidified my own resolve. I was no longer just fulfilling Richard's last wish. I was embracing a new path, defining family on my own terms. The ringing silence after Michael stormed out was not empty. It hummed with the quiet strength of my decision. The waiting for Clara was the hardest part. Each day I checked my phone, hoping for a message, a sign. The painting of the sunset became my silent companion, a constant reminder of the woman I was reaching out to. I didn't push, didn't bombard her with calls. I simply let her know I was there, and then gave her the space she desperately needed. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone chimed. It was a text message, short and to the point. Can we talk? Clara. My heart leaped. Yes, I typed back instantly, my fingers trembling. Whenever you're ready. We met in a neutral spot, a quiet cafe near her studio. She looked tired, her eyes still shadowed, but there was a new softness to her expression, a weariness that spoke of profound introspection rather than raw anger. She clutched a mug of herbal tea, her gaze fixed on the steam rising from it. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she began, her voice low, and a lot of crying. It's a lot to take in. My whole life, everything I thought I knew. She paused, taking a slow, steadying breath. I was angry. So angry. At Sarah for giving me up. At Richard for not finding me. At my adoptive parents for keeping the secret. And, honestly, a little bit at you for dropping this bomb on me. She looked up, her gaze meeting mine, and I saw the honesty in her eyes. I understand, I said, my voice gentle. You have every right to feel all of that. But, she continued, a faint tremor in her voice, I also read the letter again. And again. And I looked at the locket. It's a difficult truth, but it's still truth. And I can see the pain in his words, the regret. And what you said, about his fear, about being a flawed man. It resonated. She pushed the locket, still tarnished, across the table towards me. I want you to hold on to this. For now. I think I need to process it a little more before I can truly accept it. I nodded, respecting her boundaries, and carefully picked up the locket. It was a gesture of trust, a small but significant step. And you, she continued, a faint, almost shy smile touching her lips, you didn't have to do this. You could have just ignored the letter, kept the secret. But you chose to find me. You chose to share this, even though it must have been incredibly painful for you too. Her gaze softened further. Thank you, Eleanor, for finding me. Those words, so simple, yet so profound, brought a fresh wave of tears to my eyes. They weren't tears of grief or betrayal now, but of relief, of hope, of a nascent connection blossoming in the most unexpected of places. This was the true treasure Richard had left. Over the next few months, Clara and I began to build a relationship, cautiously, tenderly. We met for lunch, for long walks along the beach near her studio. I shared stories of Richard, the funny anecdotes, his quirks, his deep love for me, filling in the blanks of the man who was her biological father. She, in turn, shared glimpses into her quiet life, her passion for art, her solitary joys. We discovered small, surprising commonalities, a shared love for jazz music, a quiet appreciation for a well-tended garden, a dry, understated sense of humor. She would often bring her sketch pad, quietly drawing as we talked, capturing moments in charcoal. Michael, surprisingly, began to soften. Emily, ever the pragmatist, had, to my astonishment, seen the new sister as a potential asset. Think of the networking possibilities, Michael, she'd said, I later learned. An artist. So unique. And an adopted sister? It's a wonderful, heartwarming story for the wedding speeches. It shows depth. Emily, it turned out, valued appearances as much as money. Under her influence, Michael grudgingly accepted Clara's existence, though his interactions remained strained and a little awkward. He would often refer to her as Richard's other daughter rather than my sister, but it was progress. For me, the transformation was profound. My love for Richard, once a pure, untarnished ideal, had now matured into something deeper, more complex. He was not a saint, but a man who had grappled with his own demons, and whose final act had, paradoxically, brought a new kind of love into my life. The loneliness that had enveloped me after his death had receded, replaced by the quiet joy of a rediscovered family. I saw him now, not just as my husband, but as a human being, flawed and striving, whose journey had, in the end, led to this beautiful, unexpected reunion. Chapter 12: Echoes and Legacy. Life, as I had always known, was rarely a straight line. It was a tapestry woven with unexpected threads, some bright, some dark, all contributing to the whole. My quiet widowhood, once a predictable, somber landscape, had exploded into a vibrant, chaotic, and ultimately, deeply fulfilling new reality. My home, once a museum of memory, was now a place where new memories were being made. Clara would often visit, bringing her paints, sometimes sketching in my garden. Her presence, a quiet hum of creative energy, filled the house with a different kind of warmth. We weren't a conventional family, not by any stretch, but we were a family nonetheless. Clara brought with her a lineage I hadn't known existed, a new branch on our family tree, enriching the roots that Richard had left behind. The diamond ring, sold for Michael's wedding, had been the catalyst. Its monetary value had funded the important day he and Emily had so desperately desired. But the true treasure, the one hidden in its unassuming velvet box, had been the truth. That fragile, yellowed letter and the small, tarnished locket had shattered my world only to rebuild it, stronger and more expansive than before. Michael, though still very much Michael, had undergone a subtle shift. The wedding, grand and ostentatious, had passed. Emily, the meticulously planned bride, was now settled into her role as Michael's wife. And while Michael still prioritized success and appearances, he occasionally surprised me. A thoughtful phone call asking about Clara. A less sarcastic tone when discussing the artist's sister. He was learning, slowly, reluctantly, that the world was larger than his own ambitions, and that family, in all its complicated forms, held a value beyond the purely transactional. I had found peace. Not the peaceful oblivion of grief, but the vibrant, sometimes challenging, peace of acceptance. I no longer looked at Richard's photographs with a pang of betrayal, but with a nuanced understanding of a man who was both deeply loving and profoundly human. His secret had caused immense pain, but it had also, in the end, brought about a profound healing, an unexpected expansion of my heart. The locket, now cleaned and polished, hung on a delicate chain around Clara's neck. It was no longer a symbol of abandonment, but of belated love, of a connection found, and of the complex, enduring power of family. We had all, in our own ways, been touched by Richard's secret, and we had all been changed by its revelation. My life, at 70-something, was not ending, it was beginning anew. I had faced betrayal, navigated pain, and embraced an unknown future. I had learned that love was not always perfect, that people carried hidden burdens, and that sometimes the greatest treasures were found not in glittering diamonds, but in the depths of long-buried truths and the forging of new, unbreakable bonds. The ring had gone, but the truth it revealed had given me something far more precious, a daughter, a renewed sense of purpose, and a deeper, more profound understanding of the echoes and legacy of a life well lived, in all its beautiful imperfections.